Have you ever met someone who seems to think in layers, as if their mind is running a quiet underground city while everyone else is strolling on the surface? The kind of person who hears a simple statement and begins unpacking it the way others might sort through a mysterious old box in an attic, wondering what hidden stories are tucked inside. If you've ever wondered why those people operate the way they do, or maybe you suspect you're one of them, but haven't quite figured out what makes you different, then pay close attention, because the psychology behind deep thinkers is far stranger, more nuanced, and more revealing than most people expect. Deep thinkers move through the world as if they're constantly tracing invisible threads. A conversation, a moment of silence, a small detail most people ignore. None of it is ever just what it appears to be. Their minds automatically extend the lines, asking why, asking what happens if, asking what sits beneath the obvious. And here's the surprising part. Deep thinking isn't just a trait of intelligence. It's a psychological rhythm, a habitual way the mind organizes reality. It shapes the emotions they feel, the relationships they build, even the way time feels to them. Deep thinkers don't experience life in a straight line. They experience it in spirals, circling ideas until they reveal truths other people never pause long enough to notice. But this way of thinking doesn't start with brilliance. It often starts with discomfort. For many deep thinkers, the early spark is a feeling that something about the world doesn't quite add up. Maybe a childhood moment where they realized adults contradicted themselves. Maybe an experience where people reacted in ways that didn't match their words. It's that moment of psychological friction that pushes the mind to look deeper, like scratching at wallpaper and discovering another layer beneath. Some people shrug and move on. Deep thinkers don't. They can't. Their minds become magnetized toward complexity. What's even more fascinating is that deep thinkers don't just analyze the world. They analyze themselves. Their inner dialogue runs like a committee meeting that never clocks out. They'll reflect on what they said, how someone responded, whether their intention was clear, whether their perception was accurate, and what small clues they missed. And even though that can sound exhausting, there's a hidden advantage. This internal looping builds emotional awareness. They're able to pick apart their reactions, trace them back to their origins, and often understand themselves with a level of clarity that feels like having a private therapist living in their head. Not always a gentle one, but definitely a persistent one. This introspective tendency also gives them something most people overlook: the ability to sit with contradictions without panicking. Where others crave quick answers, deep thinkers tolerate ambiguity like it's a place they've visited many times. They recognize that truth is rarely a single point. It's more like a constellation that only makes sense when you step far enough back to see the whole shape. That's why they're drawn to ideas that challenge conventional thinking. It's the psychological equivalent of tasting a food with layers of flavor: sweet, bitter, smoky, everything working together, even if it shouldn't. They enjoy thoughts that feel like that. And here's where Machiavelli subtly enters the picture. Not in the political sense people usually associate with him, but in the way he approached human psychology. Deep thinkers resonate with his instinct to peel away the flattering stories people tell about themselves, and instead examine the machinery underneath. Not because they're cynical, but because they want to understand what is real, not just what is pleasant. That desire to see the underlying mechanics of motives, decisions, and behavior is something deep thinkers carry into every part of their lives. But their minds don't just dig, they wander. Deep thinkers drift into mental side paths that eventually loop back to the main idea in ways that seem almost artistic. You'll see it in the way they jump from a memory to an observation, to a question that seems unrelated, until suddenly it ties back in a way that reveals something stunning. This kind of associative thinking is one of their greatest strengths. It helps them notice patterns other people step over. It's why they can connect a casual remark to something they read years ago, or see parallels between completely different situations. Their brains treat information like a constellation map, where even distant stars belong to a larger picture. But this strength comes with a weakness: overprocessing. It's like having a microscope you can switch off. Deep thinkers might replay a conversation 10 times to decode a tone change that probably meant nothing. They might dissect a simple decision until the decision itself feels like it's dissolving into dust. They can trick themselves into believing they're making progress when they're actually just running the same mental loop in a nicer pattern. And sometimes they know they're overthinking, but stopping feels like trying to slam the brakes on a train that's already moving at full speed. Still, there is a reason deep thinkers default to this intensity. Their minds crave coherence. They don't want life to be a series of disconnected moments. They want it to form a story that makes sense. When something doesn't fit, their attention locks onto it like a missing puzzle piece. And until they understand it, they feel a subtle mental itch, a sense of unfinished business. While some people live comfortably with unanswered questions, deep thinkers collect questions the way others collect souvenirs. Interestingly, deep thinkers often struggle with expressing what's going on in their minds, because their thoughts don't form in straight lines, they form in layers. When they speak, they're trying to compress something multidimensional into a single dimension. That's why they might pause mid-sentence, or restart, or say something that sounds vague, even though the idea in their head is incredibly detailed. It's not confusion, it's translation. Emotionally, deep thinkers aren't detached the way people sometimes assume. If anything, they feel things more intensely because they analyze the meaning behind the emotion, not just the emotion itself. A small moment can hit them harder because their mind doesn't just register it, it unpacks it. This is also why they're drawn to solitude. It's not about avoiding people, it's about giving their minds space to breathe. Their thoughts feel like guests at a crowded house, and every now and then, they need everyone to step outside so they can clean up, rearrange furniture, and make sense of the chaos. But one of the most misunderstood traits of deep thinkers is their tendency to appear distant while actually being fully present. They'll absorb every detail of a moment, the expressions, the pauses, the emotional undertones, and yet they might look like they're lost somewhere else. The truth is, they're experiencing the moment more intensely than people realize. Their mind is capturing layers quickly, quietly, and with precision. And perhaps the most telling psychological marker of a deep thinker is the way they approach time. For them, the past isn't gone, it's archived. The future isn't abstract, it's something they're already mentally modeling. And the present is a crossroads where all those layers overlap. This ability to fluidly navigate past insight, present detail, and future possibility makes their thinking feel almost three-dimensional. It's why they often anticipate outcomes long before others even sense a pattern forming. When you strip away the stereotypes and look at the psychology itself, deep thinkers aren't defined by intelligence or introversion or any single trait. They're defined by a mind that refuses to accept the surface as the whole truth. A mind that returns to ideas the way some people return to comforting places. A mind that digs, wanders, loops, questions, and builds meaning in ways that feel both burdensome and beautiful. A mind tuned to the quiet frequencies most people never notice. And this is where things start to get even more revealing. Because when you look closely at how deep thinkers perceive the world, you'll find patterns that explain not just how they think, but why they often feel like outsiders, even when they're surrounded by people. It's not that they don't belong, it's that their internal world runs on a slightly different clock. While most people react, deep thinkers reflect. While others chase stimulation, they chase understanding. This creates a natural distance, not cold, just distinct, where they're present in the room, but anchored somewhere deeper inside themselves, quietly translating the world into something coherent. One of the most intriguing psychological traits deep thinkers share is an unusual sensitivity to subtle cues. Not in the soft, emotional sense people usually attach to the word sensitive, but in a perceptual sense. They notice micro shifts, a slight dip in someone's voice, the hesitation before a reply, the quiet mismatch between what someone says and what they're signaling through their posture. These tiny details form the raw data their minds love to analyze. A single conversation becomes a small ecosystem of signals, and their brain naturally starts mapping connections. Most of the time, they don't even do it on purpose. The processing just happens, like a background program that never fully shuts off. This ability can make them seem almost eerily intuitive, but the truth is that intuition for deep thinkers isn't magic. It's pattern recognition, built from constant observation. Their mind stores fragments from hundreds of previous experiences, hundreds of prior emotional landscapes. So when they sense something about a situation that others miss, it's because their internal library is massive and alive, and it's constantly matching patterns in the environment to patterns they've seen before. But this same sensitivity can also make social situations tricky. Deep thinkers sometimes get overloaded by the sheer amount of unspoken information they pick up. A casual gathering might feel simple to most people, but to them it becomes a dense network of shifting dynamics, motives, moods, and contradictions. This doesn't mean they're socially anxious. Many aren't. It just means their minds are processing more than the situation calls for. They're aware of undercurrents most people float right past. Another fascinating aspect is their relationship with ideas. For many deep thinkers, ideas aren't just tools, they're landscapes. They explore them, test their strength, check how they hold up under pressure. They're not content with surface-level opinions. If you watch closely, deep thinkers often evaluate ideas the same way a jeweler examines a gemstone, tilting it, checking the fractures, studying the way light passes through. Their curiosity is not casual, it's structural. They want to understand the architecture of the idea, the load-bearing points, the parts that crack easily. This is why they often ask questions others consider too much. But for them, it's simply the minimum required to see the shape of something. They're not trying to interrogate you. They're trying to understand the framework of what you're saying. They want to find the foundation before they build on it. Because they think this way, deep thinkers often build unusually rich mental models. It's not uncommon for them to develop theories about people's behavior or dynamics between groups, not from a place of judgment, but from a desire to map the complexity. They might not share these theories, partly because they know it can sound like over-analysis, and partly because the ideas don't feel finished. Their thoughts often feel like drafts they're constantly refining, and they rarely feel the final version is ready to speak out loud. There's also an interesting paradox. Deep thinkers are both incredibly independent and incredibly self-critical. They trust their mind to find answers, but they also examine their own thinking with the same intensity they apply to everything else. They'll question their motives, dissect their beliefs, and even challenge their own perspectives long before anyone else does. They don't wait for external criticism. Their internal filter is already running a full audit. This internal scrutiny gives them psychological depth, but it can also create hesitation. They might hold back ideas they've spent hours thinking through, because a small part of them wonders whether they overlooked something. Their mental standards are high, sometimes unfairly high, and they apply them to themselves first. And yet, this is what allows them to develop insight that isn't just clever, but genuinely meaningful. Because they're willing to wrestle with their own contradictions, their thoughts become honed, precise, less influenced by emotional bias. Over time, these insights accumulate into something powerful, a kind of internal clarity most people don't cultivate. They understand themselves, not perfectly, but honestly. Emotionally, deep thinkers often experience feelings in layers. They don't just feel something, they observe themselves feeling it, and then analyze why they felt it. This meta-awareness creates emotional depth, but also emotional loops. They can get caught dissecting their own pain, or hopes or doubts, until the feeling starts to blur. This is one reason deep thinkers sometimes struggle to explain what they feel. It's not one thing, it's several, and those layers don't translate easily into simple sentences. Their relationships reflect this complexity. When a deep thinker connects with someone, it's rarely superficial. They value conversations that stretch, not skim. They're drawn to people who stimulate their mind, not just their emotions. They appreciate someone who can question them without threatening them, who can challenge an idea without dismissing them as a person. And when they feel understood, truly understood, it becomes a kind of anchor for them. Not dependency, but connection that feels real, earned, and rare. But because they think in such depth, they're also very selective. Not necessarily picky about personality traits, but picky about resonance. They sense quickly when a connection is shallow or transactional, and they quietly drift away rather than forcing it. They're not avoiding people, they're avoiding emptiness. They want conversations with weight, with friction, with nuance. Shallow socializing feels like trying to breathe through a thin straw. Now, one aspect of deep thinking that doesn't get enough attention is how it influences creativity. Deep thinkers often generate ideas that seem unusual, surprising, or ahead of their time, because their mind naturally explores territory others don't step into. They follow trails of thought into hidden corners. They ask questions no one else thinks to ask. They mix concepts that appear unrelated and discover meaning in the intersection. Creativity for them isn't a skill. It's a side effect of how their mind navigates reality. Yet even with this ability, they're rarely satisfied. Their ideas feel incomplete, even when others find them impressive. This is because deep thinkers don't look for one right answer. They look for the most truthful one. And truth to them is always evolving, always unfinished. They live in an ongoing mental conversation, where every conclusion leads to another doorway. Something else that sets deep thinkers apart is their internal pace. Even if they move slowly on the outside, their inner world rarely sits still. When they rest, their mind keeps unfolding new angles. When they're silent, their thoughts are running simulations. When they're bored, their imagination starts creating meaning out of nothing. And when something captures their interest, they dive into it with an intensity that almost feels like momentum. This internal momentum is part of why so many deep thinkers prefer spending time alone. It's not loneliness, it's alignment. Silence allows their thoughts to expand without interruption. Solitude gives them a sense of mental spaciousness, where their mind can stretch fully. And even though they enjoy meaningful interactions, they need time alone to process everything they take in. Deep thinkers also tend to have an unusual memory. They recall specific details, not because they're trying to remember them, but because they assign meaning to the details, while others overlook them. A sentence that struck them years ago, a moment of awkwardness, a gesture that felt sincere. They store these things because their mind tagged them as important clues in understanding how people and life actually work. Their perception of mistakes is especially unique. Where many people view mistakes as failures or embarrassments, deep thinkers see them as data. They analyze what the mistake revealed about their assumptions, their emotional patterns, or the hidden rules guiding the situation. This doesn't mean they enjoy messing up, but they extract meaning from failure in a way that reshapes them. But all these traits come with a quiet struggle. Deep thinkers often feel like their mind is both a gift and a weight. They appreciate the richness, the insight, the clarity, but they also feel the heaviness of never being able to turn it off. Their brain keeps showing them too much, too many possibilities, too many interpretations, too many meanings layered over everything. And even though they learn to manage it, the mental volume never fully drops. Yet there's something undeniably powerful about the way they move through the world. Their ability to question deeply, see patterns, sense nuance, endure ambiguity, and explore meaning gives them a kind of psychological resilience that isn't loud but is incredibly strong. They don't need everything to be simple. They don't need life to hand them prepackaged answers. Their mind is built to navigate complexity, and in that complexity, they often find truths other people never discover. But to really understand deep thinkers on a psychological level, you have to explore one more dimension, the way they form their worldview and the hidden principles that guide the decisions they make, often without realizing it. And this is where things become even more revealing, because once you see these underlying mechanisms, so much of their behavior suddenly makes sense.